Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into something a little more fragile than your lower back after sleeping wrong on a hotel pillow in 1997. We're diving into the era when fashion decided that looking like you hadn't eaten since the Clinton administration was not only acceptable, but aspirational. Welcome to the 1990s, the age of dial-up internet, frosted tips, and a beauty standard so sharp it could cut glass. Not the fun 90s. Not Tamagotchis and boy bands. I mean the pale, hollow-eyed, runway-lit world of Heroin Chic, where under-eye circles were haute couture, where collarbones had fan clubs, where the ultimate accessory was looking like you'd just wandered out of an existential French film with a cigarette and unresolved trauma. Before we slip into tonight's story, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe if you're enjoying these bedtime history journeys. And thank you for suggesting this topic. We're also now live on Spotify, so you can listen there too. The link is in the description. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. Somehow it's always either 11 PM or 2:37 AM with you, and I truly appreciate you being here. Now go ahead and dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft, steady hum. Get comfortable. Adjust the pillow. Tuck your feet in. The 90s won't bite, but the industry might. And let's just pause for a moment. Have you ever wondered how fashion went from neon aerobics and supermodel glamazons to deliberately looking exhausted? How did we collectively decide that the ideal vibe was a Victorian ghost who just discovered espresso? Why were dark circles suddenly desirable? Who looked at a cigarette dangling from a model's hand and thought, yes, that's the mood? Did designers truly believe this was artistic rebellion? Or was it just marketing dressed up in eyeliner? And what did it feel like to be a teenager in 1995, flipping through a magazine and realizing that your healthiest features were suddenly unfashionable? What was it like to be Kate Moss at 19, told that her small frame and angular face were not just beautiful, but revolutionary? What did photographers see through their lenses? What did brands see in the numbers? And what did everyone conveniently ignore? And now, congratulations. You've just woken up in 1993. The air smells faintly of Calvin Klein perfume and cigarette smoke. MTV is on in the background. Someone is playing Nirvana. You're thin, very thin. The camera loves it. The industry loves it. The world calls it edgy. In the early 1990s, the glossy reign of Cindy, Naomi and Claudia began to fade, not because they were less beautiful, but because the mood of the decade shifted. You step into a casting room where curves and confidence are suddenly labelled too polished, too powerful, too 1980s. Designers whisper about something raw, something undone. The Amazonian glow of the supermodel era is quietly replaced with a new aesthetic. Smaller, paler, almost fragile. Glamour is out. Emptiness is in. You can feel it in the air of the studio. Just a few years ago, the ideal woman strode down the runway like a victorious general. Big hair, big presence, big everything. The supermodels of the late 80s were celebrities in their own right. They didn't just wear the clothes, they were the event. They smiled. They posed like they owned the planet. They looked strong enough to bench press the photographer and then charge him for it. Now, strength is suspicious. You stand in line at a go-see, portfolio tucked under your arm. The booker flips through it without much expression. Very healthy, she says, in the tone someone might use to describe a casserole they do not intend to eat. Healthy, you quickly learn, is not the compliment it used to be. Let's talk about why. It's time for context. The 1980s were loud. Power suits, shoulder pads, corporate ambition, supermodels who looked like they could run Fortune 500 companies between runway shows. But the 1990s arrived with a different emotional climate. Recession, grunge, cultural fatigue. The optimism curdles into irony. Suddenly, looking triumphant feels tone-deaf. So, fashion pivots. Designers begin talking about minimalism, about stripping things back, clean lines, neutral palettes, less excess, and somewhere along the way, less body. You notice that sample sizes shrink, just slightly at first, then more. Clothes are cut straighter, meant to hang rather than curve. The ideal body becomes something closer to a sketch, long, narrow, almost adolescent. The drama moves from bold silhouettes to the negative space between bones. Ever tried to look undone while actually being carefully styled? It's exhausting. Backstage at a show, you overhear a stylist murmur. We want her to look like she just rolled out of bed, which is ironic, because it took 3 hours, 2 makeup artists, and a strategic lack of breakfast to achieve that exact effect. The supermodels of the previous era radiated presence. The new faces are asked to radiate absence, blank expressions, distant eyes, a kind of cultivated detachment. You're told not to smile. Smiling is eager, smiling is commercial. High fashion now prefers something closer to existential fatigue. And the audience adjusts quickly. Magazines begin featuring these new bodies front and centre. The covers shift from glossy confidence to moody restraint. You flip through the pages and realise the aspirational woman no longer looks like she just closed a major business deal. She looks like she hasn't returned your text in 3 days and may never will. What's fascinating is that no one announces the change officially. There's no press conference titled, "We regret to inform you that curves are over." It just happens. Quietly. Systematically. You see it in the casting sheets, in the way agents encourage clients to lean out a bit, in the way photographers light the body to emphasize angles instead of softness. It's subtle enough to feel natural, inevitable even. But here's the quiet truth. Beauty standards don't drift. They are steered. And as you stand in that casting room, shoulders slightly rounded to appear less imposing, you understand that you're not just modelling clothes, you're modelling a mood. A cultural shift away from abundance and toward austerity. The era of the supermodel wasn't killed by scandal or scandalous behaviour, it was replaced by a vibe. Confidence felt too loud for the times. So fashion chose fragility. And you, blinking under fluorescent lights, realised that to survive this new decade, you don't need to be powerful. You need to be smaller, not just in size, in presence, in space, in expectation. The runway hasn't changed shape, but the woman walking it has. You're 17. You've been discovered at JFK Airport. You're 5'7" in a world that worships 5'11". And yet, when the Calvin Klein campaign launches in 1993, your slim frame and blank, almost bored expression redefine what beauty looks like. The industry calls it refreshing. Critics call it dangerous. But overnight you become the face of a new body standard, one that feels attainable until it isn't. You're not built like the women who came before you. You don't tower over photographers. You don't stride into rooms like a victorious Amazon in stilettos. You're slight, angular. Your shoulders slope gently instead of commanding space. Your voice is quiet. On camera, you don't smoulder. You almost disappear. And that's precisely the point. Let's talk about the silhouette. For nearly a decade, fashion worshipped height and volume. Big hair, big glamour, big personalities. The supermodels of the late 80s filled the frame. They were statuesque, athletic, radiant. They looked like they ate breakfast and then negotiated a contract before lunch. You arrive like a whisper after a shout. In the Calvin Klein ads, you stand in stark black and white light. Minimal makeup, bare skin. Underwear that looks less like seduction and more like vulnerability. The camera lingers not on curves but on angles, hip bones, collarbones, long narrow limbs. Your expression is distant, almost detached, as if the entire performance of beauty feels faintly inconvenient, and the world tilts. Designers see possibility. Here is a body that doesn't overwhelm the clothes. Here is a face that doesn't demand attention, but absorbs it. You are not larger than life. You're almost fragile. And in the early 90s, fragility feels modern. Backstage, you notice the shift immediately. Casting directors murmur about that Kate look. Agents begin scouting girls who resemble you. Not in personality, but in proportions. Smaller, frames, narrower hips, shorter stature. Suddenly 5'7" isn't a disadvantage, it's a revolution. Ever tried to become a revolution without meaning to? You walk into fittings and the sample sizes slide over your body with eerie precision. Clothes hang straight, clean, minimal. Designers adore how fabric falls from your shoulders without interruption. You become the blueprint for a new kind of hanger, one that doesn't compete with the garment. The industry praises the change as democratic. She looks like a real girl, they say, as if the previous era's models were carved from marble and not born human. The phrase real girl echoes through interviews and editorials, but here's the quiet irony. You are genetically rare, exceptionally slim without effort, especially at 17. What feels attainable on a billboard becomes unattainable in real life. Teenagers flip through magazines and think, she looks normal, I can do that. They do not see the lighting, the styling, the youth, the biology. Let's step into a high school bedroom in 1994. Posters on the wall, a magazine spread open across the carpet. You, Kate, stare out from glossy pages with that now famous blank gaze. A girl studies the image and pulls her sweatshirt tighter around her waist. She thinks the new standard is softer. It isn't. It's just quieter. In interviews, you shrug off the controversy. You're young, you model, you show up. The cultural weight being placed on your shoulders isn't something you designed. You didn't invent the hunger for smaller bodies. You simply fit the mood. And the mood was tired of power. Designers wanted undone. Photographers wanted detached. The decade wanted something that looked less like excess and more like restraint. You happen to embody that effortlessly. That's the strange thing about beauty standards. They don't announce themselves as shifts. They crystallize around a face, a body, a moment, and you become that moment. You didn't storm the runway with dominance. You drifted onto it. And in drifting, you changed the shape of fashion. Not by growing taller, but by making smaller feel monumental. You stand under harsh black and white lighting, minimal makeup, visible ribs, underwear as outerwear. The ads are stripped down, provocative, almost clinical. Calvin Klein doesn't sell excess, it sells intimacy and vulnerability. The campaign doesn't shout, it whispers, and that whisper becomes a cultural earthquake, turning barely there into a billion-dollar aesthetic. Let's talk about the lighting. It's unforgiving. No golden glow, no soft blur, just stark contrast that sharpens every angle of your body. The camera doesn't hide shadows beneath your cheekbones. It deepens them. It doesn't smooth your skin. It exposes it. The result feels raw, almost documentary. As if you weren't styled at all, just found, mid-thought, mid-sigh. Of course, you were styled. It just took a team of professionals to make it look like it didn't. The genius of Calvin Klein in the early 1990s wasn't loud branding. It was restraint. The ads feel intimate, like you've walked into someone's bedroom uninvited. White sheets, plain walls, underwear that looks like it was pulled on without ceremony. No elaborate poses, no theatrical hair. Just you, standing there, slightly slouched, as if beauty were an afterthought. And here's the twist, that casualness is strategic. In a decade exhausted by excess, minimalism feels honest. The 1980s was saturated with gloss and volume, so Calvin Klein strips everything away. Colour, ornament, bravado. What's left is skin, bone, negative space. It's fashion as subtraction. You're told not to perform. Don't smile too wide. Don't arch your back dramatically. Just exist. Maybe look mildly bored, maybe slightly uncomfortable, as if being seen is something you tolerate rather than crave. The message is subtle but powerful. Real is sexy. Vulnerable is sexy. Unadorned is sexy. And thin becomes synonymous with all three. Ever notice how the camera lingers on collarbones in these campaigns? On the delicate lines where fabric meets hip bone? The underwear isn't just clothing, it's a frame. It outlines what's missing as much as what's there. You shift your weight slightly during the shoot and the photographer murmurs approval. Perfect. Don't move. Stillness becomes part of the aesthetic. The less you do, the more powerful the image feels. Now step outside the studio. Billboards go up. Magazine spreads multiply. Teenagers tear out the ads and tape them to bedroom walls. The images feel rebellious, not because they're loud, but because they're quiet. They look like they're rejecting glamour itself. But here's the paradox. It's still selling something. Underwear sales surge. The barely there look becomes aspirational. Brands across the industry take notes. Less makeup, straighter lines, thinner frames. Suddenly looking slightly unwell is rebranded as high fashion minimalism. The word heroin chic starts floating around cultural conversations, not coined by Calvin Klein directly, but attached nonetheless. The industry insists it's about art, about mood, about stripping beauty down to its essence. Critics argue it glamorizes something darker, and you, standing under those lights, are caught in the middle. You're not being asked to look sick, you're being asked to look effortless. To look like you woke up with that body, that bone structure, that distance in your eyes. The difference is semantic. The impact is cultural. Let's talk about intimacy. Calvin Klein's campaigns don't feel like fashion shows. They feel like moments. Private. Almost intrusive. The camera sits close, as if it knows you. That closeness makes the thinness feel even more personal. This isn't a distant runway fantasy. It's bedroom proximity. The whisper travels further than a scream ever could. Other designers follow. Advertising shifts. The industry realizes that understatement can be more provocative than spectacle. The body becomes the primary statement, and the smaller the body, the sharper the statement appears. You finish the shoot, pull on your clothes, step back into the New York air. You may not feel revolutionary. You may just feel tired. But the image you created will circulate for years. Because Calvin Klein didn't just sell underwear. It sold a mood, a silhouette. An idea that less colour, less fabric, less body was somehow more. And once that idea took hold, it didn't need to shout. It only needed to be seen. Backstage at Paris Fashion Week, you notice something different. The casting calls are narrowing. Designers murmur about angles and lines. Bodies become hangers. Cheekbones become architecture. The runway lights sharpen every shadow. And suddenly, the thinner you are, the more high fashion you appear. Let's step fully backstage. It smells like hairspray, espresso and nerves. Garment bags rustle like restless ghosts. Assistants dart around with clipboards. Steam rises from portable irons, and in the centre of it all you stand in a line of models waiting for fittings. You look around. The room feels quieter than it did 5 years ago. Not literally quieter, someone is shouting about hemlines, but visually quieter. The girls beside you are smaller, narrower. Their shoulders slope inward. Their hips barely disturb the fabric of the sample dresses hanging behind them. You remember stories of the late 80s shows, the glamour, the hair, the presence. Those women commanded the runway like rock stars. Now, the mood is different. Designers talk about minimalism, precision, clean geometry. The clothes are sleek, stripped back, architectural, and architecture apparently prefers straight lines. It's time for fittings. You slip into a dress cut like a column. No padding, no structure to enhance curves. The fabric falls directly from collarbone to thigh. The designer circles you slowly, tilting his head. "Can we make her a little sharper?" he asks. "Sharper. You're not a pencil, but you understand what he means." The samples are made in one size. They are not adjusted upward. They are adjusted downward. If you don't fit, you don't walk. There is no conversation about altering the garment to accommodate you. The garment is the ideal. You are the variable. Backstage mirrors line the walls. You catch glimpses of yourself in fragments, an elbow here, a rib there. The lighting above is unforgiving, fluorescent and cold. Every contour becomes pronounced. Every shadow deepens. The runway itself amplifies it. Let's walk out there. The lights hit you like interrogation lamps, white-hot, angled, precise. They don't soften, they carve. They turn collarbones into cliffs. They turn hip bones into punctuation marks. From the audience, those shadows read as high drama, editorial, severe. You're told to, keep your expression neutral. No smiling, no bounce in your step, just a long, steady glide. The walk becomes less about performance and more about detachment. Have you ever tried to look invisible in front of hundreds of people? It's an art form. The crowd sits in neat rows. Editors, buyers, critics. They scribble notes as you pass. They don't comment on your personality. They comment on lines, on drape, on silhouette. The word body isn't used often. Instead, they say proportion. Proportion becomes everything. Designers begin selecting girls who create the cleanest outline against the clothes. The thinner the frame, the less distraction from the garment. The body becomes negative space, a quiet backdrop for the concept. Bodies become hangers, and hangers, as you may know, are not meant to take up space. Backstage after the show, you hear quiet comparisons. She's perfect for Prada. She's too commercial. Commercial now means approachable. Approachable means healthy. Healthy means not quite right. The language shifts, but the message is consistent. Smaller equals serious. Smaller equal couture. The hollow look begins to dominate entire seasons. New faces appear each month, narrower, younger, almost interchangeable. Agencies scramble to sign girls who fit the emerging mould. The mould itself gets tighter. You notice meals disappearing from craft services. Black coffee becomes a staple. Someone jokes that Paris is the best place to lose weight. No one laughs too loudly. The irony is almost poetic. Fashion, an industry built on imagination and abundance, narrows its definition of beauty to something fragile, as if the highest expression of art requires the least physical presence. You finish another show, slip off another column dress, pull your coat around your shoulders. The applause fades quickly once you step off the runway, but the standard remains. Because once the runway goes hollow, it doesn't fill back up overnight. It just keeps walking, thinner, sharper, quieter, until the shadows look normal. It's 1994. Kurt Cobain is gone. Flannel and eyeliner dominate youth culture. The mood is disillusionment. You're told that looking tired means you're deep. Looking messy means you're authentic. Fashion absorbs the grunge aesthetic and repackages its sadness but make it editorial. You feel it everywhere. On MTV, the lighting is dimmer. In record stores, the album covers are darker. In magazines, the smiles are fading. The early 90s are not interested in sparkle. They're interested in sincerity, or at least the aesthetic of it. Let's step into your closet. Flannel shirts hang loosely over thin shoulders. Slip dresses skim narrow frames. Combat boots replace glossy heels. The look is effortless in theory. In practice, it takes careful curation to appear that you did not curate at all. You're instructed to look like you just rolled out of bed, but in a poetic way, like you stayed up all night thinking about life, not because you were doom scrolling on a smartphone that doesn't exist yet. Designers begin borrowing from the streets of Seattle and thrift stores in Brooklyn. Marc Jacobs sends grunge-inspired looks down the runway. Plaid, muted tones, oversized layers. At first, critics are confused. Is this fashion? Is this rebellion? Is this laundry day? But confusion is powerful. Fashion thrives on tension, and the tension between raw youth culture and high-end gloss becomes irresistible. What started as anti-fashion, baggy sweaters, smudged eyeliner, chipped nail polish, gets reframed under runway lights. The result is curated disarray. Backstage, makeup artists intentionally smudge kohl around your eyes. Not too perfect, not too symmetrical, just enough to suggest you've been awake for reasons that are either romantic or existential. You're told to look distant, detached, as if the world is slightly disappointing and you expected that all along. Ever notice how quickly sadness can become an accessory? The 80s celebrated ambition. The 90s flirt with apathy. You're praised for not trying too hard, for looking bored, for giving the camera a gaze that says, I could leave at any moment. This isn't just fashion, it's cultural translation. Grunge music emerged from real frustration, economic anxiety, generational uncertainty, emotional rawness. But once fashion touches it, the rough edges are smoothed just enough to be sellable. The thrift store sweater becomes a $900 reinterpretation. The unwashed hair becomes product-engineered texture. You stand in front of a mirror as a stylist tugs at your hair. More undone, she says. You wonder what that even means. The irony is almost gentle in its cruelty. The more curated the mess, the more expensive it becomes. Authenticity, once spontaneous, now requires a budget. And the body, it must match the mood. Loose slip dresses hang best on narrow frames. Oversized sweaters look most dramatic on slight shoulders. The grunge aesthetic, with its layers and slouch, accidentally or perhaps inevitably favours thinness. The fabric drapes more convincingly when there's less of you beneath it. Suddenly, looking like you haven't eaten much feels aligned with the cultural script. Tired equals thoughtful, hollow equals profound. You walk onto a set styled like a dingy apartment, peeling paint, unmade bed. You sit cross-legged staring past the lens. The photographer whispers, "Perfect. Stay like that." The image will be printed on glossy paper, sold in pristine bookstores. The sadness will be high resolution. Teenagers see the spread and feel seen, or they feel inadequate. It's hard to tell which is which. The line between mood and mandate blurs. Fashion didn't invent grunge, but it refined it, softened it, monetized it. What began as a soundtrack of frustration becomes a visual language of cool detachment. And you, standing there in a slip dress and combat boots, are both participant and product. You're not asked to be joyful, you're asked to be interesting. And in 1994, interesting looks a lot like exhausted. So you tilt your head slightly, let your shoulders round forward, allow your eyes to glaze just enough to suggest depth. Sadness, but make it editorial. And just like that, melancholy becomes marketable. In a stark New York studio, photographers chase vulnerability. They ask you not to smile. They want distant, detached, unreachable. Your collarbones cast dramatic shadows. Your eyes look heavy. The image feels artistic, moody, serious. No one says the word starvation. They say aesthetic. Let's talk about the camera. It does not simply record. It selects. It amplifies. It decides what matters. You stand on a seamless white backdrop that curves gently where wall meets floor. There are no props, no distractions, just you and the lens. The photographer peers through it like a scientist examining a rare specimen. Don't pose, he says softly. Just be. which is a complicated instruction when your being is under inspection. The lighting is angled to catch bone. It slides across your shoulders and pools in the hollows beneath them. A slight turn of your torso transforms your ribcage into landscape. The shadows do half the storytelling. They create depth where softness might once have lived. In previous decades, photography adored glamour, glossy lips, wind machines, big hair that defied gravity. Now the lens prefers gravity. It prefers the way skin drapes over structure. It prefers stillness. Ever notice how stillness can feel more powerful than motion? You're told not to smile. Smiling feels commercial, approachable. This isn't a toothpaste ad, this is art. So you relax your mouth, let it fall neutral. Let your gaze drift slightly above the camera as if you're thinking about something profound or nothing at all. The photographer nods approvingly. The industry begins to equate thinness with seriousness. Fuller face reads as cheerful, youthful, accessible, but a hollow cheek reads as complex, as if you've lived through something quietly tragic. It's remarkable how quickly cultural associations form. In the darkroom, or later, on the editing screen, contrast is heightened. Black becomes blacker, white becomes harsher. Your body becomes a composition of lines and negative space. The photograph doesn't scream beauty, it whispers fragility, and fragility photographs beautifully. Let's move to the contact sheets. Rows of nearly identical images. In some, you look almost alert. In others, slightly more fatigued. The chosen frame is rarely the one where you appear vibrant. It's the one where your expression hovers somewhere between boredom and melancholy. That's the sweet spot. Back in the 80s, photographers chased power. Now they chase vulnerability. The cultural mood has shifted toward introspection, toward the idea that beauty should feel accidental, even reluctant. You lean against a wall painted industrial grey. The paint is chipped intentionally. Your hair is left slightly unbrushed. A makeup artist dabs away shine rather than adding glow. Radiance is suspicious. Glow implies health. Health implies effort. Effort is out of fashion. The camera zooms in closer. It isolates your neck, your clavicle, the curve where shoulder meets bone. The body becomes fragmented into aesthetic components, less about the whole woman, more about the angles she creates. And the thinner the angle, the sharper the image. No one in the studio says, "We need her to look hungry." Instead they say, "We need her to look real," or "We need edge." The language softens the intention. It reframes extremity as artistry. Meanwhile, magazines fill with these photographs. Pages of girls who look distant, almost unreachable. The repetition normalizes it. What once felt stark begins to feel standard. You finish the shoot and wrap yourself in a coat. The studio lights flick off one by one. In the dimness you look less dramatic, less skeletal, just a person again. But the image will circulate without context. It will be printed large, admired for its mood, for its seriousness, for its restraint. And viewers won't see the careful lighting, the angles, the subtle coaching. They will just see the bones. Because in the age of fragility, the camera does not merely love bones. It elevates them, frames them, and quietly teaches the world to do the same. Magazines begin using a new word, waif. It sounds whimsical, fairy-like, harmless, but the expectation beneath it is rigid. You're supposed to look prepubescent, almost breakable, a woman, but not fully. The line between youthfulness and erasure becomes dangerously thin. Let's sit with that word for a moment. Waif. It drifts off the tongue like something delicate, like a character in a Victorian novel wandering through fog. It doesn't sound demanding. It doesn't sound punishing. It sounds poetic, but in practice it is exacting. You stand in front of a mirror backstage and study the silhouette expected of you. Narrow shoulders, minimal curves, hips that barely shift the line of a dress. The ideal isn't overtly sensual, it's subdued. The suggestion of girlhood stretched into adulthood without fully arriving. Designers begin favouring models who look younger and younger. Not in years necessarily, but in shape. The body must feel slight, almost unfinished, as if maturity is something to be carefully avoided. Ever tried to look like you haven't grown into yourself yet? It's a strange assignment. Hair is left long and loose, often centre-parted, falling flat against your face. Makeup is minimal, bare skin, maybe a touch of mascara. The goal isn't glamour, it's innocence tinged with something harder to define. You are meant to appear untouched by excess, untouched by curves, untouched by too much life. And here's where it becomes complicated. Youthfulness has always been prized in fashion, but waif culture sharpens that preference into a narrow aesthetic lane. The ideal body begins to resemble that of an adolescent: slim hips, small chest, angular limbs. Clothing hangs straight down, uninterrupted. The less you disrupt the fabric, the better. In editorial spreads, you're styled in oversized sweaters that swallow your frame, slip dresses that skim without contour, knee socks, flats, sometimes even pigtails or baby doll silhouettes. The visual language blurs the boundary between childlike and chic. No one says, look younger. They say, look fresh, or look ethereal, or we want something fragile. Fragile becomes fashionable. Backstage conversations shift subtly. Agents encourage you to maintain that narrowness. Designers request girls who fit into smaller and smaller sample sizes. The industry doesn't announce it as regression. It frames it as evolution. But evolution toward what? You walk the runway with shoulders slightly hunched, gaze lowered. The power strut of the 80s is gone. In its place is something softer, quieter, almost apologetic. The audience interprets it as high art. In high school bedrooms across the country, teenage girls absorb the message. The ideal woman now resembles them, or at least a version of them before curves arrived. For some, it feels accessible. For others, it feels like a countdown clock. You flip through magazines and notice how often the word waif appears in captions. It's used admiringly, as if being slight is not only beautiful but virtuous, as if occupying less space is somehow noble. Have you ever noticed how praise can sound gentle while carrying sharp edges? The waif doesn't dominate a room. She doesn't overwhelm. She doesn't command. She floats, drifts, exists lightly. The cultural mood of the 90s, introspective, slightly disenchanted, aligns perfectly with this aesthetic. The waif appears contemplative, sensitive, deep. She doesn't smile broadly. She gazes sideways. She seems both present and distant. And in that distance, fashion finds its muse. But the expectation is rigid beneath the whimsy. You must not fill out too much, not round out, not solidify. The moment your body asserts itself, the label shifts from ethereal to commercial. Commercial, of course, being the quiet insult of the decade. You step off the runway and wrap yourself in a coat. The lights fade, the music stops, the word waif lingers in the air. It sounds soft, but it asks you to become smaller, not just in body, in presence, in visibility. And the thinner that line between youth and erasure becomes, the more carefully you're expected to walk it. Backstage, conversations change. Diet tips become rituals. Skipped meals become normal. You hear words like clean and disciplined. The mirrors are everywhere. The pressure is silent but constant. The sample sizes shrink, and so do the girls trying to fit into them. Let's step fully into that dressing room. Garment bags hang like sentries along the walls. Steam hisses softly from an iron in the corner. Makeup brushes clatter against a folding table. On the surface, it's chaos. Underneath, it's calculation. You sit in a folding chair while a stylist zips you into a sample dress. It fits. Barely. She exhales in relief, as if you've passed an exam. Good, she says. You're perfect for this. Perfect, you've learned, means small enough. The language backstage is rarely dramatic. No one stands up and announces, let's all be unhealthy. Instead, it's softer, more polite. I'm being good today. I'm doing clean. I can't eat before a show. The words float through the room like harmless gossip, but repetition turns suggestion into rule. You notice how often food is discussed, not with joy, with strategy. Black coffee becomes a personality trait. Water is sipped like medicine. Someone nibbles half an apple and declares herself full. You nod, as if this is normal, as if hunger is simply part of the uniform. Ever tried to ignore your own body while standing in front of 3 mirrors? Mirrors line every wall. You see yourself from every angle, front, side, back. The fluorescent lighting is merciless. It highlights any softness, any curve, any deviation from the straight line the clothes demand. Let's talk about sample sizes. Design houses produce one set of runway garments in a single, very small size. Altering them upward is expensive and time-consuming. Altering models downward is, tragically, easier. So the unspoken expectation becomes clear. Fit the sample, or don't work. Agencies reinforce it gently. Stay in shape, keep it tight. No one defines shape or tight explicitly. They don't have to. The runway defines it for you. You begin to notice patterns. Girls disappearing into bathrooms longer than necessary. Sudden obsessions with running. Whispered conversations about how to suppress appetite. It's never presented as suffering. It's framed as commitment. Discipline is admired. And discipline in this context means restraint. Backstage before a major show, the air is thick with nerves. A tray of catered food sits largely untouched. Models pace in heels, conserving energy while pretending not to be lightheaded. You adjust a strap on your dress and tell yourself you're fine. The music starts. The adrenaline kicks in. On the runway, you look composed, controlled, serene. No one in the audience sees the calculations behind that stillness, the skipped breakfasts, the measuring glances, the quiet competition over who can take up the least space. After the show, applause echoes. Editors praise the collection. Reviewers call it sleek, refined, modern. They do not review the dressing room. In interviews, the industry insists it doesn't promote unhealthy behavior. It celebrates diversity of look, they say, artistic expression. The word disorder is rarely used. Instead, it's framed as personal choice, individual responsibility. But you know how the ecosystem works when work goes to the smallest frames. The ecosystem adapts. You step onto a scale in a hotel bathroom later that night. Not because anyone told you to, but because you've absorbed the rule. Smaller is safer. Smaller is booked. Smaller is praised. The pressure is silent but constant. No one shouts. No one forces. The system simply rewards a particular outcome. And so the girls shrink. Not loudly, not dramatically, but incrementally. Until the sample size feels less like a garment measurement and more like a threshold. You hold a cigarette not because you smoke, but because it fits the mood. It signals rebellion, boredom, edge. It makes your fingers look thinner. The ads romanticize it. No one mentions the addiction part, just the aesthetic. Let's step into the photo shoot. You're leaning against a brick wall that was almost certainly chosen for its peeling paint. The stylist hands you a cigarette the way someone else might hand you a bracelet. Just hold it, she says. Don't overthink it. You don't even light it at first. It's a prop, a punctuation mark. In the 1990s, the cigarette becomes shorthand for disillusionment, for cool detachment, for I don't care, which of course means I care very much. It completes the image of the waif, slight frame, heavy eyes, thin fingers wrapped around something burning. Have you ever noticed how smoke photographs beautifully? It curls, it lingers, it softens harsh lighting just enough to make the scene feel cinematic. A thin trail rising beside your cheekbone adds movement to an otherwise still frame. The camera loves contrast. Pale skin, dark eyeliner, grey smoke twisting into the air. The cigarette becomes less about nicotine and more about narrative. You're not supposed to look addicted. You're supposed to look contemplative, as if you're thinking about something profound while casually inhaling existential dread. Fashion has always borrowed from vice. In earlier decades it flirted with decadence, champagne, excess, glossy nightlife. But in the heroin chic era, the cigarette fits the mood more precisely. It's smaller, quieter, more solitary. You're told to rest it between your fingers, slightly loose, the way you might hold a thought you're not sure you want to finish. Your shoulders slope forward, your gaze drifts off camera. The result is intimate, almost intrusive. Let's talk about the symbolism. In the 1950s, cigarettes were glamorous. Hollywood starlets with red lips and confident smiles. In the 1990s, they're different. Less about glamour, more about grit. Less about celebration, more about detachment. You don't beam at the camera. You don't toss your hair. You simply exist beside the smoke. And it makes your hands look narrower. It gives your body something to do without looking posed. It creates angles. It elongates the line from wrist to elbow. In a culture obsessed with thinness, even the props collaborate. Backstage at shows, you see girls, huddled near service entrances, exhaling into the night air. Some smoke for real. Some just hold the cigarette for the aesthetic, taking a single drag and letting it burn away untouched. The ritual becomes part of the uniform. Coffee in one hand, cigarette in the other. Ever tried to look effortlessly rebellious while following a script? The irony is gentle but persistent. What began as a symbol of rebellion becomes an accessory sanctioned by the very industry it was supposed to resist. Fashion packages it, reframes it, prints it on glossy pages. No ad copy says, "Be unhealthy." Instead, the images whisper, "Be interesting." And in the visual language of the 90s, interesting looks slightly damaged, slightly indifferent, slightly untethered. You finish the shoot, stub out the cigarette. The room smells faintly of smoke and hairspray. The photographer scrolls through contact sheets, nodding at the frames where the ash glows brightest against your pale skin. Those will be the ones that run. Teenagers will tape them to bedroom walls. They won't see addiction statistics. They'll see cool detachment. They'll see thin fingers and hollow cheeks framed by a ribbon of smoke. Because the aesthetic edits out consequence. It keeps the curl of smoke. It removes the cough. And in the age of fragility, even a burning cigarette becomes just another line in the composition. Another way to look smaller, sharper, more distant. Not because you smoke, but because it fits the mood. In 1997, the president publicly criticizes heroin chic, calling it destructive. The backlash becomes political. Suddenly fashion is being asked questions it doesn't want to answer. You watch the industry defend itself, claiming art, not influence. Let's rewind to that moment. You're backstage at a show in New York when someone mentions it between sips of espresso. Did you hear what he said? A makeup artist raises an eyebrow. A publicist shrugs. The President of the United States has just weighed in on fashion. That doesn't happen often. The comment is pointed. The imagery, he suggests, glamorizes drug use. It normalizes despair. It makes fragility look aspirational. And for the first time, What had been whispered in opinion columns and parent-teacher meetings is now spoken from a podium with a seal behind it. The mood shifts. Fashion, which prefers to critique society rather than be critiqued by it, suddenly finds itself on defense. Designers are asked whether their campaigns promote unhealthy behavior. Photographers are questioned about their aesthetic choices. Editors are cornered for comments. You watch the interviews unfold on television screens mounted in green rooms and hotel lobbies. The industry response is swift and polished. It's about minimalism, someone says. It's about mood, another insists. It's art. Art becomes the shield. You stand in a fitting room listening to the debate echo through headlines. On one side, public health advocates, parents, cultural critics arguing that the images are harmful. On the other, fashion executives defending creative freedom. Ever noticed how quickly a trend turns serious when politics gets involved? Up until now, Heroin Chic had lived mostly in glossy pages and on runways. It felt niche, insider. Now it's national conversation. Daytime talk shows discuss it. News anchors debate it. The phrase itself becomes controversial. Backstage, the girls are quieter. You can feel the tension. No one wants to be the face of controversy, but many already are. The images are printed, the campaigns are launched. The look is embedded. Let's step into the broader context. The mid-90s were marked by rising concerns about drug use and public health. Heroin, in particular, had re-entered cultural conversation. The name heroin chic, though coined by journalists, tied the aesthetic to something darker, whether fashion intended it or not. And now the highest office in the country has acknowledged it. You watch designers double down on their explanations. They talk about authenticity, about rejecting artificial glamour, about reflecting the mood of a generation disillusioned by excess. They insist they are holding up a mirror, not creating the reflection. But mirrors shape perception too. You walk the runway later that season and sense a slight recalibration. The clothes remain minimal, the faces remain serious. But there's a subtle attempt to soften the harshest edges. A touch more colour here, a slightly brighter light there. The industry doesn't collapse, it adjusts, because fashion is nothing if not adaptive. Privately, some insiders admit the criticism stings, others dismiss it as moral panic. The debate becomes layered. Is fashion responsible for societal behaviour, or merely responsive to it? Are images powerful enough to influence action, or are they just images? You, standing under hot lights in borrowed clothes, are not invited into those boardroom discussions, but you feel the ripple. For the first time, the aesthetic you've embodied is no longer just edgy. It's scrutinized, and scrutiny changes the atmosphere. The applause after shows feels slightly different. The interviews more careful. The word heroin is used less casually, rebranded, reframed. But the silhouette remains, because even when politics enters the room, fashion rarely abandons a profitable look overnight. Instead, it reframes. You step off the runway and into the hallway where reporters wait. Cameras flash, microphones hover. Art or influence, reflection or responsibility. The questions linger longer than the music, and for a moment you realise something quietly profound. The era that once thrived on indifference is now being forced to answer, whether it wants to or not. You see headlines about excess, clubs and chaos. The narrative blurs. Is the aesthetic influencing behaviour or reflecting it? The tabloids feast on thinness and scandal, feeding the same cycle they pretend to condemn. Let's step outside the runway and into the flashbulbs. It's midnight in London, or maybe New York. The location hardly matters. There's a velvet rope, a line of black cars, a swarm of photographers waiting like seabirds circling a fishing boat. You step out, coat draped loosely over narrow shoulders, eyeliner slightly smudged from a long day. Click, click, click. By morning, the photos are everywhere. You weren't doing anything particularly dramatic. You walked into a club. You laughed at something someone said. You lit a cigarette because everyone else did. But in print, it becomes a narrative. The party girl, the waif in chaos, the face of excess. The tabloids love contrast. On Monday, they praise your bone structure. On Tuesday, they question your health. On Wednesday, they print grainy photos of you leaving a nightclub and speculate about what you did inside. Ever noticed how quickly admiration turns into accusation? The 1990s tabloids operate on appetite. Celebrity culture is expanding. Paparazzi photos sell, and Heroin Chic provides the perfect visual shorthand for drama. Pale skin, hollow cheeks, dark circles under tired eyes. It fits the storyline of late nights and questionable decisions, even if the reality is far less cinematic. You flip through a magazine at a newsstand and see your image framed by bold type. Wild, out of control, reckless. The adjectives stack up like accusations. But here's the irony. The same outlets that criticize the aesthetic also amplify it. They zoom in on your collarbones. They comment on your weight. They speculate when you gain 5 pounds and when you lose 3. Thinness becomes both a trophy and a threat. Backstage at shows, the girls whisper about which photos ran this week, who was caught outside which club, who looks too thin according to one columnist and not runway ready according to another. The narrative is dizzying. Let's talk about the myth of the party girl. She is effortless, detached, slightly dangerous. She doesn't try too hard, she barely eats, she barely sleeps. She floats through VIP rooms like a ghost in designer boots. The image is intoxicating, but myths flatten complexity. You're 19, or 21, or 25. You work long hours, you travel constantly. Sometimes you go out because that's where the networking happens. Sometimes you stay in. Sometimes you're exhausted and just want room service. The tabloids don't print room service. They print the flash. They print the moment your eyes look heavy under camera glare and turn it into evidence. They stitch together images and call it a lifestyle. Is the aesthetic influencing behaviour or reflecting it? It's a question no one answers cleanly. Some girls lean into the myth. It feels easier to play the role than fight it. Others retreat. But either way, the camera follows. You walk past a newsstand again and see a headline warning about the dangers of heroin chic, printed directly above a photo of you looking angular and pale. The contradiction is almost impressive. Critique sells, scandal sells, thinness sells. The tabloids condemn the look while profiting from it. They frame you as cautionary tale and cultural icon in the same breath. And the public consumes both. Teenagers read about excess and internalize the aesthetic anyway. Designers insist the look is about art, not lifestyle. Journalists insist they're exposing the problem while feeding it daily. You step into another car, another club, another flash. The myth grows larger than the person, and somewhere in the blur of headlines and camera pops, the line between image and identity fades until the party girl exists mostly in print, hovering between scandal and style. Fed by the very pages that claim to be warning us about her. You step into a fitting room. The clothes only exist in one size. Your body must adapt. Designers don't scale up. Models scale down, and the standard becomes self-perpetuating. Let's close the curtain behind you. The fitting room is barely large enough to turn around in. A single harsh bulb hums overhead. A rack of garments waits like a silent jury, sleek monochrome, cut in long, uninterrupted lines. Each piece is a sample, and sample means one thing. This is the size. There is no alternative hanging in the back. A stylist hands you a dress. Careful, she says, not unkindly. The zipper is delicate, the fabric expensive. You slide it over your shoulders, exhale gently, and feel the material catch at your hips. The room goes quiet. Almost, someone murmurs. Almost is a dangerous word. Let's talk about how this works. Design houses create one prototype of each runway look. It's expensive to produce multiples. Patterns are drafted to a specific measurement, traditionally very small, often equivalent to a US size 0 or 2 in the 1990s. Altering upward requires time and money. Altering downward requires less fabric. So the logic becomes simple. If you don't fit the sample, someone else will. You stand there while hands adjust seams, tug gently at hems, smooth fabric over bone. The goal is clean lines, no pulling, no strain. The garment must appear effortless, and effortless, in this context, means your body disappears inside it. Ever tried to compete with fabric? The dress doesn't negotiate. It doesn't stretch to accommodate you. It doesn't whisper affirmations. It simply exists in its predetermined dimensions. You are the variable. The garment is the constant. Backstage at shows, you hear it plainly. She's too big for this collection. Too big might mean a single inch. It might mean a body that is perfectly healthy, perfectly functional, simply not aligned with a pattern drafted months ago. The sample size trap is elegant in its cruelty because it rarely feels personal. No one says, "You are wrong." They say the clothes are small. As if the garment descended from heaven at that measurement, immutable and sacred. Agencies internalize it quickly. They send girls who fit the samples. Designers grow accustomed to seeing only those proportions. The runway becomes visually uniform. Editors praise the cohesive look. Cohesive is another dangerous word. You step onto the scale in your hotel room not because someone demanded it that night, but because the logic has settled in your bones. If the clothes don't change, you must. And the system hums along smoothly. Let's move to Fashion Week. Fittings run late into the night. Girls rotate in and out of tiny rooms. Some fit perfectly, others are dismissed gently. There is no shouting, no dramatic rejection. Just a quiet, "We'll call you." The next morning another girl takes the slot. Designers defend the practice as tradition, as practicality, as necessity. After all, clothes need a base size to be created. But over time, the base becomes the ideal. The ideal becomes expectation, and expectation becomes pressure. You notice how the standard perpetuates itself. Because the clothes are small, the models must be smaller. Because the models are smaller, designers design smaller. Because the designs are smaller, agencies scout smaller. Round and round it goes, a perfectly tailored loop. From the audience, the runway looks seamless, elegant, controlled. The garments glide, the silhouettes align. No one sees the calculus behind the curtain. You zip the dress back down, step out of it carefully, hand it back to the stylist. "Maybe next season," she says. You nod, as if seasons are neutral, as if time alone will alter the measurement. But the sample size remains the same. And so, quietly, consistently, the bodies adapt. Not because they want to, because the clothes do not. Calvin Klein, Marc Jacobs, Jill Sander. You walk through their collections, minimal, monochrome, stripped bare. The clothes hang differently now. They're not built for curves. They're built for edges. Let's step into the showrooms, white walls, concrete floors, racks spaced with surgical precision. The air smells faintly of fabric dye and ambition. Gone are the loud prints and theatrical silhouettes of the previous decade. In their place, slip dresses that skim like whispers, tailored coats that fall in straight uninterrupted lines, trousers that graze hip bones without apology. Minimalism isn't just a style choice, it's a philosophy. Calvin Klein refines the art of reduction. Underwear becomes outerwear. Neutral palettes dominate black, white, beige, grey. The body beneath the garment is meant to be subtle, almost incidental. The clothes don't celebrate fullness, they trace restraint. You slip into a bias-cut dress. It clings lightly, not sculpting so much as revealing. There's nowhere to hide, no ruching, no padding, no architectural trickery. If the line is going to look clean, your body has to provide it. Edges matter now. Marc Jacobs, during his now infamous grunge period at Perry Ellis and later under his own label, disrupts the luxury conversation. He sends plaid and slip dresses down the runway in a way that feels anti-establishment and yet meticulously constructed. The garments appear casual, almost thrown together, but their drape demands a certain frame, narrow shoulders, slight hips, and almost adolescent straightness. Have you ever noticed how minimalism magnifies the body instead of disguising it? Without embellishment, there is nothing to distract from silhouette. No bold pattern to pull the eye, no dramatic structure to reshape proportions. The garment falls as it falls, and if the body interrupts that fall with curves, the line breaks. Jill Sander takes minimalism to its purest form: precision tailoring, crisp shirting, long lean coats. Her aesthetic is intellectual, disciplined, restrained. The models walking her runway look almost ascetic. The clothing seems to prefer a body that does not insist on itself. You stand in front of a mirror wearing a perfectly cut black suit. The fabric is exquisite, the construction flawless, but the shape is straight. The power here is quiet, internal, not the shoulder-padded dominance of the 80s, but something sharper, cooler. The designers of this era redefine what strength looks like. It is no longer loud, it is controlled. And control, in fashion, often translates into containment. Backstage at these shows, you hear different language than in previous years. Words like purity, discipline, precision. The collections are described as intelligent, modern, clean. Clean is a recurring theme. Clean lines require clean silhouettes. Clean silhouettes require minimal interruption. An interruption, in the context of fabric, often means flesh. The industry doesn't say we prefer thin. It says we prefer streamlined, or we prefer lean. The vocabulary evolves, but the expectation remains. You walk the runway in a long ivory coat that falls from shoulder to ankle, like a single stroke of paint. The audience murmurs approvingly. The line is uninterrupted. The garment hangs exactly as intended. It is beautiful, but it is built for edges. Designers defend their vision as artistic expression, and it is. The 90s minimalists created garments that still influence fashion decades later. Their work was innovative, thoughtful, and culturally resonant. Yet their aesthetic also aligned perfectly with the narrowing body ideal of the time. Because when fashion strips everything away, colour, excess, ornament, it leaves one focal point: the body. And in this era, the body that best complemented that philosophy was slight, angular, contained. You step off the runway and watch the next girl glide past in identical lines. The collection looks cohesive, harmonious, pure. The designers have defined the era, not with loud statements, but with subtraction. And in subtracting excess from clothing, the industry quietly subtracts from the body as well. MTV becomes a runway. Music videos blur fashion and rebellion. Pale skin, messy hair, hollow stares fill your television screen. The aesthetic spreads faster than any runway show ever could. Let's turn on the TV. It's 1995. The remote is slightly sticky. The volume is too loud. And there it is, another music video in grainy, desaturated tones. The singer leans against a wall, hair falling into tired eyes. The model draped beside him looks like she just wandered in from a Calvin Klein campaign. Slip dress, smudged eyeliner, expression unreadable. The runway used to decide what trickled down. Now the screen does. MTV plays on a loop in living rooms, dorm rooms, basements. Fashion is no longer confined to Paris and Milan. It's broadcast between soda commercials and countdown shows. The distance between high fashion and teenage bedrooms collapses. Ever notice how quickly repetition turns into normalization? You see the same silhouette again and again. Narrow shoulders, long limbs, low-rise jeans hanging from hip bones, tank tops that reveal collarbones like they're part of the outfit. The look feels accidental, effortless, as if the stylist just shrugged and said, "Yeah, that's fine, but it's curated." Music videos become mini fashion editorials with soundtracks. Directors borrow the language of runway minimalism, washed-out lighting, urban backdrops, a kind of deliberate disinterest. The aesthetic of fragility slides seamlessly into the aesthetic of rebellion. Because rebellion, in the 90s, looks tired. It looks like you stayed up too late thinking about capitalism. It looks like you forgot to brush your hair on purpose. It looks like you haven't eaten much, but you're too cool to care. You're cast in a video as the quiet girl at the edge of the room. The camera lingers on your profile. The singer belts angst into a microphone while you stare into the middle distance. Your body becomes part of the mood board. The difference between model and real girl blurs. Music videos often cast both. The waifish look travels beyond agencies and into casting calls for band girlfriends and background extras. Let's talk about speed. A runway show might reach a few hundred insiders. A music video reaches millions. Teenagers in suburban bedrooms, college students in dorm lounges, kids flipping channels after school. The aesthetic spreads faster than any fashion week ever could. You walk past a mall and see mannequins dressed in slip dresses layered over t-shirts, combat boots under delicate fabrics, ribbed tanks paired with loose jeans that hang straight instead of curve. The look has escaped the industry. Back in the 80s, music videos were flashy, sequins, choreography, spectacle. Now, they are stripped back. The camera shakes slightly, the lighting is dim, the faces are serious, and the bodies are slight. You sit cross-legged on a couch watching a new video premiere. The girl on screen looks vaguely like you, or maybe you look vaguely like her. The similarity is the point. She appears accessible, attainable, until she isn't. Have you ever compared yourself to a television glow at midnight? The pale skin on screen looks almost luminous against dark backdrops. Hollow cheeks become dramatic under stage lights. The aesthetic of fragility becomes inseparable from the soundtrack of the decade. Fashion and music feed each other. Designers dress musicians. Musicians influence street style. Street style gets reinterpreted by designers. A loop forms, and in that loop the thin, detached silhouette becomes the visual shorthand for cool. You finish the shoot. The director yells cut. The band packs up. The video will air next week. It will run between chart toppers and soda ads. And somewhere, someone will see the look and think, that's what depth looks like. That's what edge looks like. That's what cool looks like. Not because a runway said so, but because MTV did. Behind every image is a budget. Thinness is efficient. Clothes drape predictably. Shoots move quickly. The business case for extreme slimness hides behind talk of artistry. Let's follow the money. You're standing in a studio at 7:12 a.m. The crew has been there since 6. Lights are rented by the hour. The photographer's rate is astronomical. The stylist has pulled thousands of dollars worth of clothing on loan. Every minute costs something. Efficiency is everything. You slip into the first look. A long, narrow slip dress in cream silk. It falls straight from shoulder to ankle. No need for extensive tailoring. No complex pinning. The garment hangs as the designer intended because your frame matches the sample measurements almost exactly. The stylist exhales in relief. Have you ever noticed how often relief is tied to conformity? When a body fits the industry's narrow standard, things run smoothly. There's no scrambling to adjust seams, no frantic calls to ateliers for last-minute alterations, no complicated restructuring of silhouettes. The clothes behave, and behaving is profitable. Designers produce samples in a single size for runway and editorial shoots. Manufacturing multiple sizes for early collections would be expensive and time-consuming. It's simpler to design around one fixed form and hire models who fit it precisely. The body becomes a logistical solution. On set, time matters. If garments drape predictably, the team moves faster. Faster means fewer overtime charges. Fewer overtime charges mean higher margins. It's not romantic, but it's real. You move from look to look with minimal adjustments. The photographer doesn't have to fight fabric bunching at the waist or pulling across the hips. The lines remain clean, the silhouette consistent. The editing process later will be smoother. Consistency sells. Let's step into a design meeting. Executives discuss production costs, fabric waste, pattern grading, scaling designs for retail. A slimmer base model simplifies early stages of development, less fabric, cleaner, prototypes. Predictable results on camera. No one stands up and says, "We want extreme thinness." They say, "We want precision, we want efficiency, we want clean lines." Artistry and accounting sit at the same table. Ever try to separate aesthetics from economics? It's harder than it looks. The business case for slimness hides behind language about vision. Designers talk about form, about how the garment should skim the body like a brushstroke on canvas. But canvas is chosen carefully. A smaller body requires less adaptation. Less adaptation means fewer variables. Fewer variables mean tighter control over the final image, and control is profitable. Agencies respond accordingly. They scout girls who fit the mold to minimize friction. Friction slows things down. Friction costs money. The result is an ecosystem where thinness is not just fashionable, it's operationally convenient. You stand under hot lights for the fifth look of the day. The team moves quickly. The dress zips without struggle. The pants fall exactly where intended. The art director nods approvingly at the monitor. "Perfect," she says. Perfect in this context means seamless, predictable, efficient. Back at headquarters, executives review campaign proofs. The images are cohesive. The garments look consistent across models. There are no distracting deviations in silhouette. The brand identity remains intact. Sales projections rise. The conversation publicly remains about art, about capturing the spirit of the times, about minimalism as philosophy, and all of that is true. But beneath the philosophy lies arithmetic. A body that conforms reduces cost. A body that conforms reduces complexity. A body that conforms becomes part of the supply chain. You step off set and wrap yourself in a robe while assistants reset lights. No one mentions margins. No one discusses production spreadsheets in front of you. But the structure is there, humming quietly behind every campaign. Behind every image is a budget. And in the 1990s, thinness wasn't just aesthetic. It was efficient. You're 15, flipping through a glossy magazine. You compare yourself. The images feel distant yet intimate. You don't see lighting or styling. You just see a standard. Let's stay in that bedroom for a moment. The carpet is slightly worn. There's a poster on the wall, maybe a band, maybe a model torn from the very magazine in your lap. The lamp on your nightstand casts a soft yellow glow. Outside, the world is quiet. Inside, the pages whisper, flip. Another editorial spread. Pale girl on a rumpled bed. Slip dress slipping off one shoulder. Eyes half-lidded, as if she's thinking something complicated and beautiful. You study the angle of her collarbones, the way her jeans hang low on her hips. You look down at your own body. Ever notice how comparison happens in total silence? No one stands beside you narrating the difference between studio lighting and bathroom mirrors. No one explains how sample sizes work or how many frames were discarded before that one image made it to print. You just see a standard. The magazine feels glossy and authoritative. It has weight. It smells faintly of ink and perfume inserts. It feels official. Like the world outside your bedroom has voted on what is beautiful and mailed you the results. And the result looks smaller. You turn sideways in front of your mirror, pull your shirt tight across your stomach, tilt your head the way the model did. You practice the distant stare. It feels strange on your own face. The images are distant. They live in New York studios and Paris runways, but they feel intimate because they're in your hands, on your floor, under your pillow. Let's talk about frequency. In the 1990s, magazines arrived monthly. Music videos air hourly. Television commercials repeat relentlessly. The waifish silhouette doesn't appear once. It appears everywhere. Repetition normalizes. You and your friends talk about it. At school, she's so pretty. She's so thin. You don't say it with envy at first. You say it like observation, but observation quietly turns into aspiration. In health class, you learn about nutrition in broad, neutral terms, but in the cultural classroom of your bedroom, you learn something more specific. That thinness is not just attractive, it's serious, artistic, cool. Have you ever tried to outgrow a standard that grew up before you? Puberty arrives inconveniently. Hips widen, faces soften, bodies change in ways that feel almost rebellious against the magazine pages. The model looks prepubescent, suspended in a narrow frame that doesn't seem to shift with time. You wonder if your body's supposed to reverse. The teenage bedroom becomes a private runway. You try on outfits, step into low-rise jeans, adjust tank tops, compare silhouettes. Sometimes you skip dessert. Sometimes you skip lunch. Not because anyone demanded it, because the standard sits quietly on your nightstand. The industry never enters your room physically, but its images do. They sit folded in drawers, pinned to corkboards, slid into lockers, passed between friends. The aesthetic spreads through hallways and sleepovers, morphing into trends at the mall. You don't see the photographer adjusting shadows to deepen cheekbones. You don't see the stylist clipping garments tighter in the back. You don't see the hours of editing that remove softness. You just see a standard. And standards feel like rules. Years later, you might look back at those magazines and see them differently. You might notice the artifice, the staging, the narrowness of it all. But at 15, in the quiet of your room, the images feel less like suggestion and more like instruction. You close the magazine, turn off the lamp, lie back on your bed. In the dark, the standard lingers, not as a headline, not as a campaign, but as a shape in your mind. A silhouette you're not sure you're meant to fill, but feel expected to try. From New York to London to Milan, the look travels. Agencies begin scouting smaller frames globally. What started as a niche aesthetic becomes the global default. Let's board a plane. You're flying overnight from JFK to Heathrow. The cabin lights are dim. Fashion assistants sleep awkwardly against garment bags in the overhead bins. The same faces that walked New York last week will walk London in 3 days, then Milan, then Paris. Fashion Week isn't one event. It's a relay race, and the baton is thin. In New York, the silhouette has already shifted, minimal, sharp, restrained. In London, the mood is slightly edgier, more underground, but the bodies are similar. Narrow hips, long limbs, that distant, almost bored expression. By the time you land in Milan, the tailoring grows more severe, but the frame remains slight. In Paris, the aesthetic crystallizes into high art. The look travels faster than luggage. Ever notice how quickly a trend feels inevitable once it crosses borders? What began as a specific cultural mood in early 90s America, minimalism, grunge, anti-glamour, begins to detach from its origin. In Europe, it's reframed as intellectual chic. In Japan, it merges with avant-garde minimalism. In Eastern Europe, agencies scout girls whose natural slenderness fits the new standard with almost unsettling precision. You step into an agency office in Prague. The walls are lined with fresh faces, teenagers from small towns, newly signed. Bookers point to Polaroids taped to the wall. Very Paris, someone says. Very Calvin. The aesthetic has become shorthand. Global agencies begin adjusting their scouting criteria. Height still matters, but now so does narrowness. So does angularity. So does the ability to look almost unfinished. The waif silhouette becomes exportable, marketable, scalable. Designers no longer need to explain the look. It's understood. Backstage in Milan, you hear Italian stylists using the same language as New York. Clean, lean, modern. The vocabulary travels with the clothes. The sample sizes remain consistent across continents. The body required to fit them does too. Let's talk about globalization. The 1990s are a decade of accelerating media. International magazines share covers. Campaigns run simultaneously in multiple countries. A Calvin Klein ad shot in Manhattan appears in a Tokyo subway. A Paris runway image lands in a São Paulo bookstore. The aesthetic no longer belongs to one city. It belongs to the network. You walk through a casting in Paris and recognize girls you saw in London. The same agencies, the same measurements, the same hollow-cheeked look. What once felt like an edgy niche in downtown New York is now the unspoken baseline. Default is a powerful word. When something becomes default, it stops being debated. It stops being described as trend. It becomes background, expected. Have you ever noticed how quickly expectation feels natural? In Milan, you try on a sharply tailored coat. It hangs straight. The designer nods approvingly. In London, a slip dress skims your frame just as cleanly. In Paris, a monochrome gown falls in a single uninterrupted line. Across languages, the silhouette remains unchanged. Agencies in smaller markets adapt. Scouts in South America and Eastern Europe search for girls who match the Paris measurements. The aesthetic becomes a global passport. If you fit it, you travel. If you don't, you stay local. The look that once felt rebellious now feels standardized. You board another plane, another hotel room, another fitting, the same mirrors, the same sample sizes, the same whispered conversations about staying lean before the next city. Fashion prides itself on reinvention, but during this era, reinvention looks remarkably consistent worldwide. From New York to London to Milan, the line remains narrow, the shoulders remain slight, the gaze remains distant. What began as a mood becomes infrastructure, and infrastructure, once built, is hard to dismantle. Because when a niche aesthetic becomes the global default, it no longer asks permission. It simply assumes you'll fit. Not everyone is comfortable. Some designers and editors push back quietly. They question whether the look glamorizes something darker, but speaking out risks contracts. Let's step into a quieter corner of the fashion world. Not the runway, not the flashing cameras, but a softly lit office with stacks of proof spread across a long wooden table. An editor leans back in her chair, studying a contact sheet. The model in the images looks impossibly slight. Her eyes are heavy. Her wrists look almost fragile beneath the cuffs of a borrowed coat. "It's beautiful," someone says. "Yes," the editor replies. "But is it responsible?" The room goes still. Fashion is a business built on consensus, on mutual admiration, on shared aesthetic vision. So dissent rarely arrives loudly. It arrives as hesitation, as a raised eyebrow, as a carefully phrased email. You're backstage at a show when you overhear a designer murmur to a colleague, "We've gone a bit far, haven't we?" It's not outrage, it's uncertainty. A flicker of doubt beneath the polished surface. Some editors begin commissioning slightly different shoots, a touch more colour, a hint more vitality in the model's expressions. Nothing radical, just softer, as if testing the waters. Ever try to push back in an industry that thrives on cohesion? It requires subtlety. No one wants to be labelled difficult, or worse, irrelevant. Contracts are fragile. Advertising budgets are tied to relationships. Designers rely on magazines. Magazines rely on advertisers. Agencies rely on designers. The ecosystem is tight. A casting director quietly tells an agent, "Maybe we could look at someone a bit stronger this season." Stronger is code. It means healthier, more robust. But the agent hesitates. Will that girl book? Will she fit the samples? Risk calculation replaces moral certainty. You walk into a fitting where the designer pauses longer than usual. "We don't want her to look sick," he says, "just modern." The distinction feels thin, almost semantic. Behind closed doors, conversations grow more frequent. Health professionals publish op-eds. Advocacy groups raise concerns. Some within the industry agree privately. They've seen the pressure backstage, the skipped meals, the fainting spells no one talks about publicly. But publicly is different. Publicly, fashion defends itself. Art, expression, reflection of culture, not creator of it. The argument is rehearsed and repeated in interviews, yet privately, doubt lingers. Let's talk about risk. If a major designer suddenly cast visibly fuller models, would buyers recoil? Would critics accuse the brand of losing its edge? Would magazines refuse the looks? In an industry built on forward momentum, stepping sideways feels dangerous. You attend a small dinner in Paris, a mix of editors, stylists, photographers. The wine flows, the conversation loosens. Someone admits they're tired of the hollow look. Someone else nods. A third shrugs and says, "It's what sells." There it is again. Sales, contracts, relevance. Fashion is not immune to conscience, but conscience competes with commerce. You notice small acts of resistance, an editorial featuring a slightly broader range of body types, a runway show that casts a model who looks undeniably healthy. These moments don't overturn the standard, but they puncture it gently. Change, in fashion, rarely arrives as revolution. It arrives as recalibration. You step onto another runway, the lights still carve shadows, the silhouette is still narrow. But somewhere in the audience sits an editor who has already decided that next season will look different. Not dramatically, just slightly. Because even within the machinery of trend cycles and contracts, there are individuals who see the cost, who question the aesthetic, who weigh art against impact. They may not shout, but they are watching, and sometimes watching is the first step toward shifting the line. By the early 2000s, the pendulum shifts again. Health becomes marketable, gloss returns, but the echo of the 90s lingers in sample sizes and expectations. Let's fast forward the soundtrack. The lighting warms, literally. Campaigns begin to glow again. Skin looks dewier. Hair regains volume. The hollow stare softens into something closer to confidence. You step onto a set in 2002 and notice the difference immediately. Bronzer instead of pallor, shine instead of shadow. The word healthy starts appearing in press releases, and this time it's meant as a compliment. Designers begin experimenting with silhouettes that acknowledge curves again. Not dramatically at first. A slightly fuller skirt. A dress that traces the waist instead of ignoring it. Denim rises a fraction higher on the hip. The aesthetic shifts from fragile to fit. Fitness. Culture re-enters the conversation. Yoga studios multiply. Gym memberships become lifestyle statements. Magazines pivot from celebrating gauntness to celebrating tone. The ideal body is still slim, but now it's toned slim, athletic slim. The bones are still visible, but there's muscle beneath them. Have you ever noticed how beauty standards rarely disappear? They just rebrand. You attend a casting and hear a new phrase. She looks strong. It sounds refreshing, progressive even. But the measurements haven't shifted dramatically. The sample sizes remain small. The clothes are still cut to a narrow template. The pendulum has moved, yes, but the clock remains. Let's walk backstage at a show in 2003. The models look slightly different. More colour in their cheeks, slightly broader shoulders, a touch more presence. The designers speak of optimism, of new beginnings. The post-9/11 era brings a craving for vitality, for resilience. The mood is less detached, more intentional. Gloss returns. Campaigns shimmer again. The minimalism of the 90s gives way to a sleeker, sexier polish. Celebrity culture explodes. Red carpets dominate headlines. Pop stars embrace a more overtly confident femininity. Low-rise jeans still reign, but they're paired with visible abs instead of visible ribs. The body ideal shifts from breakable to disciplined. You notice the difference in language. Instead of waif, magazines talk about fit. Instead of fragile, they say fierce. It feels empowering on the surface. But here's the quiet continuity. The range of acceptable bodies remains narrow. The echo of the 90s hums beneath the gloss. Sample sizes have not expanded significantly. Agencies still prioritize slim frames. The expectation to take up less space hasn't vanished. It's just dressed in athleisure. You slip into a gown for a fitting. It zips without resistance, but only because you've learned how to maintain your place within the acceptable range. The designer praises your discipline. The word lingers. Discipline sounds healthier than deprivation, but it still implies control. Let's talk about memory. Entire generations of girls grew up under the heroin chic silhouette. By the early 2000s, some of them are now women working inside the industry. Stylists, editors, assistants. They carry those standards quietly, sometimes unconsciously. When curves begin to reappear on runways, the reaction is mixed. Relief, yes, but also skepticism. Is this permanent, or just a seasonal flirtation? Fashion loves cycles. You walk past a magazine stand and see covers celebrating vitality. Smiling faces, sunlit skin. The mood feels lighter, less brooding, less intentionally exhausted. And yet, if you look closely, the bodies are still controlled, still measured, still aligned with the template refined during the previous decade. The pendulum has shifted, but it hasn't broken free. Because trends are visible, structures are not. You step off another runway. The applause sounds warmer now, the lighting softer, the silhouette slightly fuller. It feels like progress, and in many ways it is. But the echo of the 90s remains in the patterns, in the castings, in the quiet expectation that even when curves return, they must return carefully. You sit with former models years later. They talk about pressure, about praise tied to shrinking bodies. They describe the applause and the cost. Let's move the setting, not backstage, not under runway lights, but at a quiet cafe table, or a podcast studio, or a softly lit living room where the heels have long since been retired. Across from you sits a woman who once walked Paris at 19. She stirs her coffee slowly, laughs at the memory of her first casting, then pauses when the conversation turns to weight. It was never said directly, she tells you. That's the strange part. No one handed you a rule book. You just learned. Learned what? That the jobs came more easily when your measurements dropped half an inch. That the compliments grew louder when your collarbones became more visible. That applause and shrinking sometimes arrive together. Ever noticed how praise can train you? She describes fittings where designers beamed when a dress zipped without alteration. Perfect, they'd say. That word again. Perfect meant compliant. Perfect meant fitting the sample. Perfect meant less. Another model joins the conversation. She remembers the constant travel, the jet lag, the adrenaline. You're exhausted all the time, she says. And when you look exhausted, people call it editorial. They laugh. Not bitterly, just knowingly. Let's talk about applause. Runway shows end with thunderous clapping. Photographers shout your name. Editors scribble praise. For a few fleeting minutes, you feel luminous, important, seen. But the applause doesn't mention what it required. It doesn't mention the skipped dinners before castings, the quiet panic before fittings, the bathroom scales in hotel rooms across continents. You sit and listen as they describe the cost. Some speak of physical toll, hair thinning, energy fading, injuries healing slower than they should. Others speak of psychological strain, the constant calculation, the way self-worth became entangled with inches and pounds. It's strange, one says softly. You get rewarded for disappearing. The room grows quiet. Let's step back into the 1990s for a moment. You were young. Many of them were teenagers when they entered the industry. The aesthetic wasn't framed as harmful. It was framed as modern, artistic, cool. And when you're 19 and told you embody the moment, you don't question the moment. You try to live up to it. Have you ever tried to be the trend instead of just follow it? It's heavy. Some models say they felt powerful, that the era gave them careers, visibility, financial independence. That part is true. Heroin Chic didn't only take, it also elevated certain faces into global icons. But elevation came with scrutiny. Tabloids speculated, critics moralized, designers demanded consistency, and through it all, the body remained central. One former model describes returning home after Fashion Week. Friends said she looked amazing. Family said she looked thin. Doctors said she looked tired. 3 interpretations, 1 body. They speak about aging out of the look, about how the industry's obsession with youth compounded the pressure. You can't be a waif forever, one says with a wry smile. Time insists. And when the trend shifted, many were left recalibrating not just careers, but identities. Let's talk about distance. Years later, they can see the era more clearly. The lighting, the marketing, the economic machinery behind it. They understand how much was systemic rather than personal. But at the time, it felt personal. It felt like your worth rose and fell with the tape measure. You sip your coffee and listen. The applause was real. So was the cost. And in the soft quiet of hindsight, the models who lived it carry both truths at once. Magazines criticize thinness while printing it. They warn against eating disorders beside ads featuring visible ribs. The contradiction becomes part of the culture. Let's open the magazine. On the left page there's a feature titled Loving Your Body in Any Shape. Soft lighting, a smiling actress talking about balance and self-care. On the right page, a full bleed advertisement, pale model, hip bones sharp against low-rise denim, eyes heavy beneath smudged liner. Turn the page, an article about rising rates of eating disorders among teenage girls, sobering statistics, quotes from doctors, advice about seeking help. Flip again, another ad, another narrow silhouette, another collarbone casting a dramatic shadow under studio lights. Ever tried to hold 2 opposing messages in your head at the same time? You should love your body, but only if it looks like this. The contradiction doesn't feel accidental, it feels structural. Magazines rely on advertising revenue. Advertising revenue relies on aspirational imagery. Aspirational imagery in the 1990s often looks like heroin chic. So the publication runs both the critique and the campaign, both the warning and the visual. Publicly, editors speak about responsibility. Privately, they negotiate contracts. You sit in a publishing meeting in 1998. Editors debate cover choices. "We need something healthy this month," someone says. There's been too much backlash. Heads nod. The chosen cover features a model with a hint more glow. Inside the issue, the aesthetic remains largely unchanged. Have you ever noticed how change sometimes arrives only at the surface? The media plays both sides expertly. It publishes essays questioning beauty standards. It interviews activists and psychologists. It runs reader letters expressing concern. And then it prints the same narrow bodies that sparked the concern in the first place. The double standard becomes normalized. Readers grow accustomed to the cognitive dissonance. It feels almost routine. You absorb the warnings intellectually and the images emotionally. Emotion tends to win. Let's step into a teenage bedroom again. You read the article about loving yourself. You underline a quote about self-acceptance. You nod along. Then your eyes drift to the adjacent page, where a model's frame looks impossibly slight in a silk camisole. Which message lingers longer? Magazines argue they are reflecting culture, not dictating it. That advertisers choose imagery, that readers demand aspiration, but reflection and reinforcement are close cousins. You walk past a newsstand and see headlines about the dangers of extreme dieting printed above a cover featuring a visibly gaunt celebrity. The warning is bold, the image is bolder, the contradiction becomes aesthetic in itself. Let's talk about tone. The editorial voice often adopts concern, caring, almost parental. But the visual language remains seductive. Moody lighting, hollow cheeks, the body framed as art. It's like saying, "Don't stare," while holding up a spotlight. Inside the industry, some acknowledge the tension. We have to sell magazines, a publisher shrugs, and controversy sells. Critique becomes content. The more the aesthetic is questioned, the more it is discussed. The more it is discussed, the more it circulates. The more it circulates, the more it embeds. You turn another page, a glossy perfume ad. The model looks distant, unreachable. The fragrance promises mystery, depth, edge. No one says the word thin. They don't have to. By now, the silhouette speaks for itself. The media's double standard doesn't shout. It hums. It operates in layout decisions and ad placements. In the quiet space between headline and image, you finish the magazine and set it down. The articles may linger in your thoughts, but the images linger in your mind. And in the 1990s, that was often the point. Fashion insists it was about mood, not drugs. About minimalism, not addiction. But the name Heroin Chic refuses to separate the two. Let's sit with that phrase, Heroin Chic. It's provocative, intentionally so. Journalists coined it, critics repeated it, and soon it stuck, like smoke clinging to fabric long after the cigarette is gone. Designers winced at it, models rejected it, publicists insisted it was a misinterpretation. It's just minimalism, they said. It's about stripping things back. It's about reflecting the cultural mood. And to be fair, that part was true. The early 90s was steeped in disillusionment, grunge music, recession anxiety, a generation suspicious of gloss and power. The aesthetic of exhaustion fit the emotional climate. Pale skin and distant stares were shorthand for introspection, not necessarily intoxication. But words matter, and heroin carries weight. You stand on set while someone casually refers to the look as edgy. The photographer adjusts lighting to deepen the shadows under your cheekbones. The stylist tugs a slip dress lower on your hip. No one mentions narcotics. No one stages syringes. The connection is implied, not explicit. That's what makes it slippery. Ever tried to separate implication from impact? Fashion argues that the look was artistic, that it captured vulnerability and not vice, that the hollow-eyed stare was about existential angst, not substance abuse, and in many campaigns that was genuinely the intent. But outside the studio, context shifts. In the 1990s, heroin use was rising again in certain communities. Public health officials were alarmed. Families were grieving. Against that backdrop, images of ultra-thin, pale, detached models took on a different tone. The aesthetic might have been about minimalism. The name made it about something else. You walk past a newsstand and see the phrase splashed across headlines. The heroin. Chic look. It's sensational, sticky, impossible to ignore. The term collapses nuance. It fuses fashion and drug culture into a single provocative label. Designers protest. We never meant that, they insist. It's a media creation, and they're not wrong. The industry did not officially brand itself after a narcotic. But the visual language, gaunt faces, dark circles, slouched postures, left room for interpretation. Interpretation filled the gap. Let's step into a boardroom. Publicists discuss damage control. They emphasize artistry. They frame the aesthetic as a reaction against artificial beauty standards of the 80s. They talk about authenticity, about rawness. All of that is plausible, but the body remains central. The look required a certain physicality, narrow, almost fragile. When the word heroin entered the conversation, it attached itself to that physicality. It suggested that the thinness wasn't just artistic, it was symptomatic, and once that suggestion circulates, it's hard to retract. You stand under runway lights, expression neutral, shoulders slightly rounded. The audience sees minimalism, or maybe they see something darker. You can't control the narrative from the catwalk. Fashion insists it was about mood. Critics insist mood has consequences. Have you ever noticed how aesthetics rarely stay confined to their original intention? The reality is complicated. Many models were simply young women navigating a trend. Many designers were genuinely exploring restraint and simplicity. The industry did not openly promote drug use, but the images existed in a world where drug culture was real, and the name Heroin Chic fused the two so tightly that they became inseparable in public memory. Years later, you look back at the photographs. Some feel undeniably artistic, beautiful in their starkness. Others feel unsettling, haunted. The aesthetic wanted to be about minimalism. The reality was that minimalism in that moment looked dangerously close to something else. And once the phrase entered the culture, the separation between art and implication was never quite clean again. You fast forward 20 years. The language changes, but the roots remain. The 90s quietly shaped how an entire generation views thinness. Let's step into the present. It's the 2010s, maybe even the 2020s. The lighting is softer now, ring lights instead of runway spots, filters instead of film grain. The vocabulary has evolved. We talk about wellness, balance, body positivity, self-love. But if you look closely, the silhouette hasn't drifted as far as we pretend. The heroin chic era didn't just pass through culture. It embedded itself. It taught a generation, quietly, persistently, that thinness equals seriousness, that taking up less space equals sophistication, that visible bones signal depth. You see it in the way people describe weight changes. She looks amazing. She's gotten so skinny. She's glowing. The compliment still orbits size. Ever noticed how deeply internalized standards feel natural? Women who were 15 in 1995 are now adults navigating workplaces, relationships, motherhood, aging. Many of them carry a mental template formed in that decade. A baseline of what ideal looked like when they first started noticing themselves. Even when trends shift toward athleticism, toward curves, toward whatever the moment demands. The underlying hierarchy often remains: slim first, everything else negotiable. Let's scroll through social media. Influencers speak the language of health now. Protein shakes, Pilates, morning routines. But the visual outcome frequently resembles a polished version of 90s restraint. Flat stomachs, narrow waists, long limbs posed carefully to elongate. The aesthetic evolved. The expectation persisted. You sit with a friend who confesses she still hears the voice of her teenage self when she looks in the mirror. "I know better," she says. "But I still compare." Compare to what? To a magazine spread from 1997, to a music video, to a silhouette etched into memory before she even understood what she was absorbing. The long-term impact isn't always dramatic, it's subtle. It shows up in how easily people equate thinness with discipline, in how headlines still track celebrity weight fluctuations as news, in how sample sizes, though occasionally challenged, remain small. Have you ever tried to unlearn a standard that felt universal? It takes effort. The 90s didn't invent body insecurity, but they amplified a specific ideal at a formative time when mass media was expanding globally and cultural images travelled faster than ever before. The girls who grew up in that era are now raising daughters. Some actively push back against the standards they inherited, others struggle quietly with habits formed decades ago. And the industry, it shifts, rebrands, recalibrates. There are more conversations, now about diversity, about inclusivity, about representation across sizes. That progress is real, but the roots remain. You see it in how quickly nostalgia cycles revive 90s aesthetics. Low-rise jeans return, slip dresses resurface, pale minimalism trends again. The mood feels retro and cool. The body ideal sneaks in alongside it. Because memory is powerful. The 90s taught us that thinness could be artistic, that fragility could be fashionable, that disappearing slightly might earn applause. 20 years later, we use different words: wellness instead of waif, toned instead of skeletal. But the gravitational pull towards smaller still lingers. You close your phone, look up from the screen. The long-term impact of Heroin Chic isn't just in archived campaigns or runway footage. It's in the quiet calculations people still make when they get dressed, in the way they assess themselves against an invisible ruler first drawn in the 1990s. The language has changed. The lighting has softened. But the roots are still there, woven into how an entire generation learned to see itself. Today's filters and trends still borrow from that era. The pale lighting, the distant stare, the nostalgia, the aesthetic never fully disappeared. Let's open your phone. It's 11:43 p.m. The room is dark except for the glow of your screen. You scroll past a photo tagged #90s minimalism. A girl stands against a white wall, flash on, skin washed pale by artificial light. Her expression is neutral, detached, almost bored. You've seen this before, not on TikTok, not on Instagram, on a Calvin Klein billboard in 1995. The lighting is different now, LED ring lights instead of studio strobes, but the effect is eerily familiar. High contrast, muted tones, shadows that emphasize bone. The caption says effortless. The comments say obsessed. Ever notice how nostalgia edits out discomfort? The 90s are trending again. Low-rise jeans, tiny tank tops, slip dresses over nothing, thin eyebrows returning like they never left. The aesthetic is framed as vintage cool, retro chic, but beneath the nostalgia lies the silhouette. Social media accelerates everything. In the 1990s, you waited for magazines to drop monthly. Now you refresh every few seconds. Trends cycle in weeks, but certain visual cues persist. Pale filters, grainy overlays, expressions that signal I care less than you. The The distant stare has become algorithm-friendly. You tilt your chin slightly upward for a selfie. Turn your body sideways to elongate the line. Pull your shoulders back just enough to sharpen the angle of your collarbones. The pose feels instinctive. It isn't. It was learned. Let's talk about filters. Many default filters desaturate colour, soften skin, add a faint wash of grey or beige that mimics 90s minimalism. They remove warmth, remove flush, remove evidence of life. You scroll past influencers recreating 90s, supermodel poses, blank gaze, slightly parted lips, hair unbrushed in a calculated way. The caption might read throwback or inspired. The aesthetic never announces its lineage, but it echoes, and echoes can be powerful. In the 90s, fashion was top-down, designers to magazines to consumers. Now it's lateral, peer-to-peer, girl-to-girl. The silhouette spreads through hashtags rather than runway shows, but the body ideal still travels. You see videos offering tips on how to look model off-duty, wear oversized blazers, don't smile too much, keep makeup minimal, stay lean. The advice feels casual, friendly. Yet the outcome resembles something older. Have you ever noticed how trends resurface with new packaging? The language now includes body positivity and inclusivity, and genuinely there is more representation than in 1995. More sizes, more conversations about health, more critique of harmful standards. But the aesthetic of fragility still finds a home online. You scroll past a viral post romanticizing cigarette smoke in dim lighting, past a slideshow of 90s runway clips set to dreamy music. The comments gush about how iconic it was. Iconic. No one mentions the pressure backstage, the sample size trap, the quiet hunger in dressing rooms. Nostalgia smooths the edges. You close the app and look at your reflection in the dark screen. For a moment, you see yourself through the filter's memory, slightly paler, slightly sharper. The aesthetic never fully disappeared. It adapted. It moved from billboards to feeds, from editorials to explore pages, from casting rooms to comment sections, because trends may fade, but silhouettes linger. And in the soft glow of your phone at midnight, the 1990s don't feel far away at all. You stand in the present, examining the photographs with distance. Some look artistic, some look haunting. You realize that trends are powerful, but so are consequences. Let's lay the photos out on a table. Black and white campaigns, runway stills, editorial spreads shot in abandoned apartments and stark studios. The models look impossibly young, impossibly narrow. Their expressions hover somewhere between boredom and burden. At first glance, you can still see the artistry. The composition is striking, the lighting deliberate, the minimalism undeniably influential. There's a reason the images endured. They captured a mood, cool, restrained, introspective. In a decade allergic to excess, they felt honest. But look a little longer. The shadows under the eyes feel heavier now. The jut of hip bones feels less abstract. What once read as edgy now reads as fragile. What once felt rebellious now feels precarious. Have you ever noticed how distance rearranges meaning? In the 1990s, the aesthetic felt inevitable. Cultural forces aligned, grunge music, economic anxiety, a rejection of glossy 80s optimism. The heroin chic silhouette seemed like a natural evolution. Fashion, reflecting the times. But reflection is never neutral. You see how repetition turned suggestion into standard, how sample sizes quietly set boundaries, how praise rewarded disappearance. None of it happened with dramatic villainy. It happened incrementally, editorial by editorial, show by show. Trends are powerful because they rarely feel like commands. They feel like consensus. You remember how quickly the look spread from New York studios to Paris runways, from MTV to teenage bedrooms. how the aesthetic became global default, how critics raised concerns, how the industry defended itself. Now, decades later, the arguments feel less urgent, but more clear. You can appreciate the design innovation and still acknowledge the cost. You can admire the photography and still question the narrative it reinforced. The two truths can coexist. Let's talk about consequence, not just in dramatic headlines, not just in political backlash, but in quiet, long-term shifts, in how an entire generation internalized a silhouette, in how self-assessment became routine, in how thinness embedded itself as shorthand for discipline and depth. Consequences don't always announce themselves. Sometimes they linger in mirrors. You flip through a magazine from 1996 and then scroll through your phone. The echoes are visible, the pale lighting, the distant stare, the narrow frame posed carefully against a blank wall. The aesthetic didn't vanish. It evolved. Looking back with 2020 vision doesn't mean condemning everything. It means understanding context, recognizing that fashion is both art and industry, that beauty standards are both creative and commercial. You realize something else. The models were young, the designers were chasing relevance, the editors were balancing art with advertising, the culture was restless. No single person orchestrated the entire shift, and yet, collectively, the impact was enormous. Have you ever participated in a trend without fully seeing it? That's the nature of the present moment. It's immersive, it's persuasive, it feels normal while you're inside it. Only later do the outlines sharpen. You stand in the present with the benefit of hindsight. The photographs no longer dictate. They document. They tell a story about a decade fascinated with fragility, about an industry experimenting with minimalism, about a culture that equated smaller with deeper. Some images still feel beautiful, some feel uneasy. Both reactions are valid. Because trends are powerful, they shape silhouettes, they shape marketing, they shape minds, but so are consequences. And when you look back now, you don't just see bones and slip dresses and smudged eyeliner. You see a lesson about how easily aesthetics can blur into standards, and how standards, once set, take time to unwind. You step into a casting office in Manhattan, fluorescent lights buzzing softly overhead. Polaroids are spread across a folding table, faces, torsos, profiles. The bookers aren't looking for sparkle, they're looking for absence, narrow hips, hollow cheeks, a kind of emotional vacancy that photographs as depth. Girls are told to lose just a little more. The phrase sounds harmless. It rarely is. Agencies begin favouring bodies that fit the new minimalist silhouette, and the feedback loop tightens. The thinner the campaigns, the thinner the castings. And the thinner the castings, the more the industry insists this is simply what the moment demands. Let's stay in that room. The carpet is industrial grey. The walls are lined with headshots pinned in tidy rows. A metal rack holds comp cards, thin rectangles of cardstock featuring measurements, printed in small clinical font. Height, bust, waist, hips, numbers that feel more permanent than your name. You stand against the wall for new Polaroids, no makeup, hair pulled back, neutral expression. Relax your face, the booker says. Don't smile, click. You turn sideways, click. You face forward again, click. The images are instant, unfiltered. They capture you in the most literal way, flat lighting, no retouching. But what they're evaluating isn't personality, it's line, bone structure, how much space you occupy without occupying it. Ever tried to look like less of yourself? The bookers speak in careful tones. She's interesting, she's close. She could be great if she just tightened up a bit. Tightened up means smaller. Smaller means safer. Safer means bookable. It's rarely framed as criticism, it's framed as opportunity. You're almost there, someone tells you. Just a little more. A little more what? A little more restraint, a little more discipline, a little more subtraction. Let's talk about scouting. In the 1980s, agencies often chased presence, tall, statuesque, commanding. In the 1990s, the criteria subtly shifts. Scouts begin noticing girls who look younger, narrower, less formed. A certain fragility becomes marketable. The word waif floats through office conversations like a compliment. Polaroids become thinner over time. You flip through a stack on the table. The faces blur together. Centre parts, blank stares, narrow shoulders. Individuality matters less than alignment with the moment. The moment demands minimalism. Minimalism demands angles. Have you ever noticed how quickly preference becomes policy? Agencies track what books informs what they scout. What they scout informs what designers see at castings. Designers choose from what's presented. The cycle feeds itself. A feedback loop disguised as inevitability. You overhear a conversation near the window. Clients are asking for that Calvin look. We need more girls who can do that Prada show. Translation. We need bodies that fit the samples without alteration. Faces that can hold a distant gaze. Frames that won't disrupt the line of a slip dress. The thinner the campaigns, the thinner the castings. And the castings become auditions not just for jobs but for conformity. You're told to come back in 2 weeks. Just maintain, they say. Maintain what? A number on a scale? A particular hollow in your cheek? It's never stated outright. It's implied. The fluorescent lights hum overhead. In another corner, a new girl arrives, 16, maybe 17, freshly discovered at a mall in Ohio. She stands uncertainly while someone measures her waist with a tape. The number is read quietly. Nods are exchanged. She'll work, someone says. Work means she fits the silhouette. Let's step outside the office for a moment. From the street, the building looks ordinary. No sign of the sorting happening inside. No indication that beauty is being distilled into fractions of inches. Inside, the casting couch of cool isn't about scandal. It's about selection. About refining the pool until only one shape remains prominent. And once that shape dominates, it feels natural. This is just what the moment demands. Someone shrugs. The moment, of course, was curated. You leave the office with your comp card tucked into your bag, your measurements printed in ink, the phrase just a little more echoing in your mind. The feedback loop tightens quietly, and in that tightening cool becomes something measurable, something subtractable, something that fits neatly into a sample size and nowhere else. You flip open a 1996 issue of Vogue. The pages are cool-toned. The models aren't smiling. They're staring past you, slouched on stained mattresses, leaning against brick walls, looking like they haven't slept in days. The captions call it raw, honest, urban. Editorial spreads drift away from fantasy and into something grittier, abandoned warehouses, unmade beds, smeared eyeliner. The storytelling becomes cinematic, almost documentary in style. But what's being documented isn't poverty or addiction. It's a carefully styled imitation of both, sold for $4.99 at the checkout line. Let's stay on that mattress for a moment. The sheets are artfully wrinkled. The wall behind the model is cracked just enough to feel authentic. A single bare light bulb hangs overhead, casting shadows that deepen every hollow beneath her cheekbones. Her hair is slightly greasy, but intentionally so. The makeup artist dabbed gloss on her eyelids to mimic fatigue. The effect is deliberate. Editorial sadness becomes a mood board. In the 1980s, fashion magazines were portals to fantasy, yachts, champagne, golden beaches. In the mid-90s, the fantasy shifts. Now the dream is detachment, cool indifference, a kind of beautiful exhaustion. Have you ever noticed how melancholy can be styled? The model isn't crying. She's not visibly distressed. She's simply distant, as if she's thinking about something too complex to explain. The reader fills in the blanks. Depth is projected onto silence. The captions reinforce it. Urban, gritty, real. Real, of course, is relative. The warehouse in the background was scouted weeks in advance. The grime was curated. The mattress probably cost more than your couch. The lighting was tested repeatedly until the shadows fell exactly where they needed to. But the final image whispers authenticity. Let's flip another page. A girl sits cross-legged on a kitchen floor, cigarette in hand, light pooling around her thin wrists. The story claims to capture the mood of a generation. The clothes are minimalist. Slip dresses, oversized knits, low-slung trousers that reveal hip bones like punctuation. The sadness feels aesthetic rather than accidental. You begin to notice repetition. The same hollow stares, the same slouched posture, the same unmade beds. Editorial spreads move away from escapism and toward a curated bleakness. It's fashion as documentary, but without the actual documentary part. Have you ever tried to romanticize discomfort? That's what these pages do. They borrow the visual. Language of struggle, dim lighting, chipped paint, bare rooms, but remove the consequences. There is no real hunger here, no real danger, only suggestion. The model's thinness becomes part of the set design. The cult of editorial sadness elevates restraint to virtue. Smiling feels commercial. Laughing feels unsophisticated. Instead, you're taught to admire restraint, to see stillness as substance. Backstage, editors discuss narrative arcs for shoots. We want something honest, one says. Honest in this context means stripped down, unvarnished. But the irony is sharp. The entire scene is varnished in intention. The sadness is choreographed. You, the reader, absorb it quietly. In your bedroom, under soft lamplight, the pages feel intimate. The models look like they exist in real spaces rather than distant runways. That intimacy makes the aesthetic more persuasive. It feels attainable, replicable. You could lean against a wall like that. You could smudge your eyeliner. You could look tired. The fantasy has shifted from luxury to mood, but mood sells too. The magazines at the checkout line promise insight into the cultural moment. They frame the sadness as depth, as rebellion against artificial glamour, as art. And in many ways, it is art, carefully composed, thoughtfully lit, culturally resonant. But it is also product, sold between chewing gum and celebrity gossip. You close the magazine and sit quietly. The images linger longer than the captions. The posture, the pallor, the suggestion that beauty looks best when it appears untouched by joy. Editorial sadness becomes aspirational, not because it is suffering, but because it is styled to look like meaning. And in 1996, meaning wears smudged eyeliner and doesn't smile for the camera. In quiet dressing rooms and whispered interviews, a phrase circulates: discipline, control, lightness. The idea that hunger is strength, that restraint equals success. You hear older models advising younger ones how to stay camera ready. You see diets shrink to black coffee and cigarettes. No official handbook says this is required. No contract states it plainly, but the message is understood. Thinness isn't just preferred, it's proof of commitment. And commitment, in this world, is everything. Let's sit in that dressing room. The air smells faintly of hairspray and nerves. Garments hang in neat rows labelled with names written in black marker. Someone is steaming a silk dress in the corner. Someone else is reapplying lip liner with surgical precision. And then there's the conversation. Not loud, not dramatic, just casual enough to pass as friendly advice. Don't eat before a show. Salt makes you puffy. Coffee helps. The tone is almost maternal, as if they're sharing tips about avoiding wrinkles in linen, not strategies for minimizing your own body. You nod. You absorb. Ever noticed how rules feel softer when they're framed as wisdom? There's no official doctrine taped to the mirror. No manifesto declaring that hunger is virtue. But the logic hums beneath everything. The smaller you are, the easier the fitting. The easier the fitting, the happier the designer. The happier the designer, the more bookings you get. Cause and effect. You watch an older model sip black coffee between castings. She looks composed, controlled. She talks about being good this week. Being good means eating less. Being good means discipline. Discipline becomes moralized. Let's talk about language. No one says starving. They say staying light. No one says deprivation. They say commitment. The vocabulary softens the reality. It turns bodily discomfort into ambition. You glance at the catering table backstage. Fruit trays mostly untouched. Bottles of water lined up like soldiers. Someone jokes that lettuce is heavy. The laughter is thin. Have you ever confused control with strength? In this world, restraint feels powerful. You can't control the critics. You can't control the trends. You can't control whether a designer changes direction next season. But you can control your intake. Control becomes currency. You overhear a casting director praise a model for her dedication. Dedication, you realize, is often visible in inches lost rather than skills gained. The applause doesn't mention how hard you worked on your walk. It mentions how lean you look in the clothes. Thinness becomes resume material. Let's step into an interview setting. A model sits under soft studio lights speaking about the industry. She uses careful words, talks about professionalism, mentions maintaining standards. The interviewer nods approvingly. They both avoid specifics, because specifics are uncomfortable. The unspoken philosophy circulates without needing to be printed. It travels through glances at scales, through casual weigh-ins at agencies, through the subtle panic before a big show. You stand in front of a mirror adjusting the strap of a slip dress. You wonder if the faint curve at your hip is visible under this lighting. You wonder if skipping dinner would make tomorrow easier. The thought feels practical. That's how it embeds. No contract says you must shrink. But the contracts tend to go to those who do. No handbook instructs you to replace meals with caffeine. But the girls who survive the longest seem to understand the system, and the system rewards endurance. Endurance in this era often means ignoring your own body's signals. Have you ever applauded yourself for pushing past hunger? In this world, that push is reframed as professionalism. You zip up the dress, the line is clean, the designer smiles. Perfect, he says. Perfect, once again, means less. The philosophy doesn't shout, it whispers. It disguises itself as ambition, as dedication, as proof that you want it badly enough. Thinness isn't just preferred, it's interpreted as evidence. Evidence that you care, that you're serious, that you're willing to sacrifice, and in an industry that equates sacrifice with success, the message doesn't need to be written down. It's already understood. By the mid-90s, it's not just fashion. You walk into a movie premiere and notice the shift. Actresses adopt the same angular silhouettes, the same smudged eyeliner and pale foundation. Red carpets begin to echo the runway. Film roles lean into waifish vulnerability, fragile heroines, haunted anti-heroes. The look becomes shorthand for complexity, for seriousness. The camera lingers on jutting collarbones the way it once lingered on glamour, and audiences absorb it without realizing the aesthetic has quietly crossed mediums. Let's step onto that red carpet. The flashbulbs pop in rapid bursts. Reporters lean forward with microphones. But something feels different from the lacquered excess of the late 80s. The gowns are sleeker, the makeup is muted, The actresses look less like bombshells and more like editorial spreads come to life. Minimalism has arrived. In Hollywood, you watch an actress step out of a Blacktown car in a slip dress that could have walked Milan the week before. Her shoulders are bare, her frame narrow, the fabric skims rather than sculpts. There's no big hair, no overt sparkle, just restraint. Restraint reads as depth. Ever notice how quickly costume becomes character? On screen, roles begin to mirror the runway mood. The ingenue is no longer bubbly and bright. She's introspective, complicated, slightly wounded. The anti-heroine smokes in dimly lit apartments. The romantic lead looks like she hasn't slept in days, not because she's exhausted, but because she's interesting. Fragility becomes narrative shorthand. Directors frame faces differently now. Close-ups linger on hollow cheeks. Shadows carve out eye sockets. Pale foundation reflects harsh lighting in a way that emphasizes angles. The camera no longer worships overt curves or glossy hair. It studies bone structure. You sit in a dark theatre watching a film premiere. The heroine walks through rain-soaked streets in a thin sweater. She looks breakable. The audience reads her as profound. The aesthetic has crossed mediums. Let's talk about influence. Actresses, once styled in old Hollywood glamour, now appear in fashion campaigns between film releases. The boundary between model and movie star blurs. A face that walks the runway one month appears on a film poster the next. The waif silhouette becomes culturally reinforced. You flip through a magazine and see an actress photographed like a fashion model. Slouched posture, distant gaze, monochrome palette. Then you watch her film and see the same visual language echoed in her character's wardrobe. The message compounds. Have you ever absorbed an aesthetic without noticing its source? That's the quiet power of cross-pollination. When fashion bleeds into film, the look gains legitimacy. It's no longer just editorial experimentation. It's cinematic storytelling. At premieres, reporters comment on actresses' weight the same way they once commented on gowns. She's so tiny. She looks so sleek. Sleek becomes praise. Tiny becomes aspiration. The camera lingers, not just on faces but on frames. A strap slipping down a narrow shoulder. A collarbone catching light. The visual grammar shifts from voluptuous glamour to angular intrigue. Hollywood, always hungry for what feels current, adopts the look eagerly. You attend an after-party. Actresses, models, musicians, everyone looks cut from the same aesthetic cloth. Black slip dresses, smudged liner, a faint air of indifference. The room feels like an editorial come to life, and audiences absorb it all. They don't see the lineage. They don't track the migration from runway to red carpet to silver screen. They just see repetition. Repetition breeds normalization. Soon, the waifish silhouette doesn't belong to fashion alone. It belongs to culture, to cinema, to celebrity, to the collective imagination of what serious, complex beauty looks like. You leave the premiere and step into the night air. The flashbulbs fade behind you. The look has travelled far from its origins, from Manhattan casting offices to Paris runways, from glossy magazines to movie screens. And somewhere along the way, fragility stopped being a trend. It became a character type, one that audiences learned to recognise and admire without ever realising where it began. By the late 1990s, a new conversation begins to form. Parents raise concerns, health professionals speak out, advocacy groups point to rising eating disorder statistics among teens. You see headlines questioning whether fashion has gone too far. Models begin sharing stories about pressure and burnout. The industry doesn't collapse, but it shifts uneasily. The look softens, a little colour returns, a little vitality creeps back into campaigns. But the era leaves a mark, because once a beauty standard embeds itself into culture, it doesn't disappear overnight. It lingers quietly, persistently, like a shadow under bright runway lights. Let's sit in that unease for a moment. It's 1998. Morning television is no longer just covering hemlines and celebrity weddings. Now there are panel discussions, doctors in suits explaining body mass index, parents describing teenage daughters who won't eat dinner. The phrase heroin chic is no longer whispered in fashion columns. It's debated in living rooms. The tone has shifted. You're backstage at a show and someone brings in a newspaper. There's an op-ed criticising the industry's obsession with thinness. The models glance at it briefly, then look away. The music starts. The lights go up. The runway proceeds as scheduled. Fashion does not implode. It recalibrates. Have you ever noticed how industries rarely collapse under criticism? They pivot. Designers begin adding warmth back into their collections. Campaigns feature slightly rosier cheeks. Hair regains volume. The lighting softens from stark grayscale to muted gold. The change isn't dramatic, it's incremental, just enough to suggest responsiveness. Advocacy groups push for health guidelines. Some fashion councils begin discussing minimum age requirements. A few countries experiment with policies around model health disclosures. The conversations feel new, fragile, necessary. You hear more models speaking openly. They talk about exhaustion, about fainting backstage, about constant pressure to remain small. Interviews grow more candid. Burnout becomes a topic. Not everyone is comfortable with the direction the industry has taken, but change is complicated. Let's step into a casting in 1999. The girls are still slender, the samples are still small, but the extreme edge has dulled slightly. Designers request healthy but lean. Healthy enters the vocabulary more confidently now. Healthy, however, is elastic. It stretches to fit what the industry already prefers. Parents continue voicing concern. Schools bring in counsellors to discuss body image. Magazine articles adopt a more reflective tone. Features on self-esteem sit beside fashion spreads that look marginally less severe. The tension is palpable. You walk past a billboard that looks almost nostalgic already. The model is thin, yes, but there's a hint of glow, a suggestion of vitality. It feels like the aesthetic is trying to reassure the public without fully abandoning its core silhouette. Have you ever tried to back away from a trend without admitting it went too far? That's the dance. The industry insists it is evolving naturally, that fashion is cyclical, that the mood of the moment is changing. All of that is partially true. But beneath the explanation lies pressure, cultural, political, parental. The backlash generation grows up watching this unfold. Teenagers who internalize the waif ideal now question it. Some reject it openly, others struggle privately. Conversations about body positivity begin to germinate, though they won't fully bloom for years. The look softens, a little colour returns, a little vitality creeps back. But the imprint remains, because beauty standards don't operate like seasonal collections. They don't retire cleanly. They seep into memory, into mirrors, into the way people evaluate themselves in quiet moments. You sit in the present and look back. The heroin chic era did not end with a dramatic curtain call. It faded unevenly, softened at the edges, folded into the next trend, but it left a shadow, and shadows are persistent, even under bright runway lights, even beneath glossy magazine covers, even as new conversations take centre stage. The echo of that era lingers, quietly, persistently. A reminder that once a culture decides smaller means better, it takes more than a season to convince it otherwise. And so the lights dim on the 1990s runway. You've survived the castings, the cigarette smoke, the flashing, bulbs, the whispered instructions to be smaller, quieter, lighter. You've watched an era decide that fragility was fashionable and that looking unwell could somehow be rebranded as art. You woke up in 1993 to a world that called exhaustion edgy and hunger disciplined. You walked the runway where bones were architecture. You stood in front of cameras that loved shadows more than softness. You felt how quickly a trend can turn into a standard, and how quietly that standard can settle into the minds of millions. And yet, like all eras, it passed. Fashion moved on, the silhouettes shifted, the lighting warmed, new faces arrived. But the ripple remained. Because beauty standards don't just disappear when the magazines change, they linger in memory, in mirrors, in the quiet way we evaluate ourselves on random Tuesday mornings. Still, here's the gentler truth. The 90s didn't invent insecurity. They amplified it. They packaged it in black and white photography and called it minimalism. But beneath the sharp angles and moody stares were real people. Young models navigating an industry. Teenagers flipping through glossy pages. Designers chasing relevance in a decade that distrusted polish. History is rarely villain or hero. It's mood, it's culture, it's people responding to the world they're in. And tonight, as you lie in your clean bed, with soft lighting, filtered water, and a thermostat you can adjust without permission from Paris Fashion Week, maybe take a slow breath. You live in a time where conversations about body image are louder, where standards are challenged more openly, where the idea of health is broader than a runway sample size. And that doesn't mean we've solved everything. It just means we've learned something. So as you drift off, let the harsh flashbulbs fade. Let the runway lights dim. Let the cigarette smoke dissolve into the dark. Because history may glamorize strange things for a while, but it always moves on. And you don't have to fit into any era's silhouette to rest peacefully tonight. Now settle in. Breathe slowly. The 1990s are over. And you, thankfully, can just sleep.